All right, so I just want to start today, piggybacking on what we talked about. I guess it was Monday or Tuesday that we have to be diligent in understanding these economic concepts that may tie back to units 1 through 5. We don't know what they're going to ask and what they don't ask. Some of the stuff can be found when we're looking at the course descriptions from all the way in units 1 through 5. So I didn't have time to get to what's known as the UN Millennium Goals. Um, as you can see, these were developed during the Millennium Summit in 2000. They were trying to reach these by 2015. That's been pushed back. But if you look at them, I don't want y'all to overthink these. These are just very basic concepts, eradicating hunger, that everybody should receive at least a primary education, working on gender equality, reducing mortality rates, so essentially improving medical health care around the globe that goes along with maternal health as well, combating HIV/AIDS, malaria, other diseases, environmental sustainability, the carbon footprint, and then developing a global partnership for development. This kind of what they've thrown out there, and we've seen a lot of these since 2000 increase for the positive. And what I mean by that is like gender equality would decrease, meaning that men and women have more equality in comparison to one another. Child mortality would decrease, but that's still to the positive, to a positive benefit. So the other thing that we're going to look at today, we're going to skip around a little bit, is while I don't know that it's going to be on there, I do want to talk about these ideas of site and situational factors because site and situation are discussed in Unit 1. One of the things we said way back in Unit 1 is site is what is there, situation is what is near. This can be regarding business as well. Site factors, what is there, what results in cost. When we talk about site factors, we're talking about land, labor, and capital. Situation factors is what is it near. And what you're trying to do with situation factors is minimize transportation cost. So when we look at site factors, this is them: land, labor, capital. What is there and how am I going to make money off of it? Typically, this is a big key for us. And what I want you to remember, we may see a question on industry, but industry is going to follow cheap labor. We've seen a big problem with this recently, right? With a lot of production being done in China, which has hurt the supply chain of us getting the pharmaceutical things that we need or anything else. But the reason everything is in China is because that's where the cheapest labor is. So industry is always going to follow cheap labor. When we talk about land, industry also is going to want cheap land. We don't see manufacturing, like huge manufacturing plants in downtown Atlanta anymore. And the reason for that is if you took a huge manufacturing firm, one, there's not enough land available, and two, it's going to be vastly expensive. So, where do we find most of your manufacturing? In suburban and rural areas, but typically they're right on the highway. If you're going down 85, like you're going to Auburn, when you get right to the border, there's a huge Kia plant. Well, Kia puts its automobile plants there because the land is cheaper, the labor's cheaper, but it has access to I-85, and they can have all of their cars to the Atlanta area in less than an hour and a half. That's a combination of site, land and labor, and situational, transportation cost, factors that play together. The other thing we look at from a situational factor standpoint is that there's a couple of things that go in here. Number one, the farther you transport something, the more it costs. But number two, think von Thunen, the heavier something is, the more it's going to cost as well. So that leads us to having to understand Weber's theory. And again, this is probably not on the test, but I think it's good to know it anyways and be able to relate it back. Side note, how much does this dude look like Tom Hanks right now? Okay? Yeah, you see it now. Either way, Weber's theory. Weber's theory is the idea that you have what are known as bulk gaining and bulk reducing industries. A bulk gaining industry, and I'm going to scoot ahead one here. A bulk gaining industry is one that gains weight as the product is produced. We're talking about televisions, refrigerators, air conditioners, cars. Think about it. You've got all these parts, you put them together, and so with bulk gaining industries, what it says is they locate closest to their markets. And the reason is if you take all these separate pieces and you put them together closest to the market, you're not having to transport that thing very far. Yet if all these separate pieces come in separately, they're lighter. You put them together, now they're heavier. So you don't want to produce something on the other end of the United States and then transport it to the opposite end. You'd rather take all those separate pieces, bring them together in one spot, put them together, and then ship them directly to their consumers all in one close area. That's why car manufacturing, all these things have different hubs around major cities because it decreases their transportation cost. The other outlier here, we just got done talking about Von Thunen, milk, fruits, vegetables. What do? They spoil quickly, which means they got to be close to their market. This is a great example. We see like these are bottling plants specifically for Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors. Every one of them locates close to a big city. San Francisco, LA, Denver, Colorado, Atlanta, like that's a bulk gaining industry in and of itself. They're going to locate close to their markets. Bulk reducing industries are different. It means that it gets lighter through production. We don't see this very much. This picture right here is copper that's been taken out of the ground. It's impure. It's got some things in it that aren't pure copper. So when you melt it down, this is its residue that's left over called gangue or something like that. But obviously what that means is this gets lighter. And for transportation cost purposes, that means that you want a copper mine to locate right next to a copper plant, okay, or what's known as a smelting plant. Why? Well, let's look at it. If this is a bulk reducing industry, if this is the refinery, okay, and all the smelteries and everything, and here's all the mines, if I take it out of the ground, I don't have to transport it very far. I take it straight to where it becomes refined. Now it's lighter, and I can transport it across the globe at a much cheaper rate. However, if the refinery or smelter or whatever is all the way over here in New York, I get the copper over here and I got to take it all the way to New York. I'm paying a huge amount in transportation cost to then make it lighter and transport it somewhere else. You're losing money. So bulk gaining industries locate close to markets. Bulk reducing industries locate close to resources. And that is Weber's theory in a nutshell. Okay? It is also called least cost theory. Modes of transportation that go along with this: ship, rail, truck, and air. It goes from least to most expensive. Cheapest transportation, most expensive transportation. Okay? Any big cities as well also have what are known as break of bulk points, and that's where you see any of these two different types intersect together. So, airport, you then take it off the plane, you put it on a truck, an interstate, that's a break of bulk point. Cities, especially your major cities, have lots of different break of bulk points, and most major cities around the world have all four of these modes of transportation. Atlanta has 3 of the 4. We don't have, obviously, the ability to ship goods. But New York, LA, Chicago, Miami, Houston, those are monstrous cities that are going to contain all 4 of these modes of transportation. Labor costs we talked about as far as site factors. You can see this again. Why is manufacturing being sent overseas? Well, here you go. Labor cost: China, India. The last thing that we're going to look at today, and I'm skipping here as best I can, is the relationship between outsourcing and what is known as the new International Division of Labor. Let me get to outsourcing first. Outsourcing is the idea that you take jobs in an MDC and you send those jobs to an LDC to take advantage of the cheap labor. When you take that job and you send it overseas, the person accepting that job is now known as being a part of what is known as the new International Division of Labor. There is not a headquarters for the new International Division of Labor. It's just an ambiguous concept that it's a group of people in LDCs who are taking these jobs as a result of being able to do it for cheaper. We've seen a big pushback against this in the United States to bring jobs back home. But the fact of the matter is, profit margins are huge when you send things overseas. Look at Shark Tank. Anytime you produce something and you take it to Shark Tank on ABC, what's the first thing they say? Oh, we can take this to China and we can produce them for a lot cheaper and you can make a ton more money. Why? They work for cheaper. That is outsourcing. And by outsourcing, you create the new International Division of Labor. Okay? So These three terms: outsourcing, transnational corporation, and new international division of labor related, because transnational corporations outsource jobs, which creates the new international division of labor. The only other thing that we might touch on here, and we're done, is what is known as export processing zones. When you outsource areas, and these countries like China specifically, they know that the main way they're making money is by receiving outsourced jobs. You have, let me get to it, areas called export processing zones, an EPZ. What this means is they have areas in the country that do nothing but bring products in, make them useful. Maybe they're making t-shirts or socks or computers or whatever else. None of those materials are going to Chinese citizens. They're making them and then they're sending directly back out to MDCs. That is known as an export processing zone. And so when we go back and we look at things like Mexico and NAFTA and all these types of things, maquiladoras in Mexico were created. They are export processing zones. Because, and NAFTA's now kind of gone by the wayside, but when NAFTA opened up and you had free trade to Mexico, what you also opened up was cheap Mexican labor. And so they started creating maquiladoras right on the border of US and Mexico. And the reason for that is when NAFTA went into effect, Detroit got decimated. And the reason was because the auto industry said, whoo, cheap labor south of the border, let's take advantage of that. And they started putting their auto plants right on the border to minimize transportation costs. You're not going to put them in southern Mexico, you're wasting money. They would put them right on the border. And so when you look at this, every one of these right on the border, these are maquiladoras. And the purpose is it gives jobs to these living in Mexico that pays them a decent wage, but it's still cheaper than what you would have paid somebody in the US to do it. So export processing zones are meant to do that, and a maquiladora is an example of an export processing zone. The last thing, this acronym, BRIC and BRICS, is just talking about these newly developing countries around the world, the ones that are kind of making the push to become these stage 4, stage 5 countries. Brazil, Russia, India, China. The S here stands for South Korea. So you may see that acronym on the test. And we're going to stop there. So make sure you're answering your review guides and filling these up. And we will meet tomorrow. But again, we're going to look at some stuff when we come back from spring break as well.